I'm Jim Check. You're watching KelownaNow. I'm here with Renee Merrifield. Thank you for joining me, Renee.
Thanks
Current
for having
MLA,
me.
and quite a interesting time, right? Quite an interesting time, right?
Interesting times we're having.
There was a saying, like there was a book, I think. Interesting.
Oh, there's a book coming.
We live in interesting times for sure, right?
Yeah,
We're
indeed.
going to talk about. It's kind of going to be a bit of a hodgepodge. We're just going to throw things around, but I think the main reason you're here is because I did that interview with Loyal Wooldridge, who was a candidate for the NDP, and I asked him that question: how much responsibility do you think the NDP has for the current state of affairs in British Columbia? And his response was that it belonged to the BC United Party or BC Liberal Party from the past. And then you had some strong thoughts on that.
Well, I actually wrote my article, the opinion piece, in direct response to that. Basically saying that in the first term, a government could say, hey, we're fixing and we're correcting course. And in the first term that a government has in power and in a majority, sure, they could say that. And that's really what we saw with John Horgan and the Green Coalition. They really called all the shots and made all the decisions, and that's what we saw. They changed the course and they changed the direction. And then David Eby coming in has really taken that and moved it forward. This election is about whether or not you like the course that we are on. A vote for the NDP is a vote for more of the same. And more of the same in hyperdrive if they get a majority. If you want change, if you're not satisfied with where things are, the voter has to say, hey, look, I need a different alternative. And that's really what we're being offered from the other side at this point.
So what's better from your perspective with the NDP in power, and what's gotten a lot worse?
I can't think of one thing that's better. I cannot think of one thing, and I've worked at it. I have tried. Have they made all bad decisions? No, not at all. I mean, there are specific, bills that I could say, no, that was a good move. Take for instance in housing. In housing, I would say that one of the good moves that they made was eliminating public hearings for developments that were fully within the OCP plan and fully within the development.
So to kind of fast track some developments.
Absolutely.
Sense, right?
If you're following the rules, because there is this rigorous public process that goes on with the official community plans. So it's like, okay, if you fit and conform within this, great, let's fast track that. The NDP were able to actually put that into law rather than leaving that up to choice with municipalities. That's great. Other things that the NDP have done, I was asked this last week in an interview, if I thought that it was like the most exceptional changes in 50 years in housing with the new bills that have been done. And I literally said, maybe if you're Karameas and all of a sudden you have every single family home is now zoned for a 4-plex or a 6-plex, maybe if you're Karameas. But unfortunately, this one-size-fits-all hammer that the NDP government has used doesn't fit a community like Karameas, where they don't have rigorous transit, where there aren't other alternate methods of getting places, where they don't have the no car kind of inner cities, etc. So it's a bizarre approach to take, to be honest. Now, if you're in Kelowna, we've had a progressive city staff who have been moving that forward. We've had the RM7 zone, which you see in the hospital areas and the downtown cores, where you already had 4-plexes, where you already had 6-plexes that were possible. Our transit-oriented corridors were all upzoned in the last OCP. So is this riveting and hot off the presses? No, it's not. It's not at all. But what the NDP are not doing is anything that's actually going to positively affect change for developers.
You were quite vocal on the Airbnb legislation. Mm-hmm. And interesting in that discussion with Loyal, where he's even saying there needs to be a made in Kelowna solution, that the solution for Kelowna is not it. You've talked about how it hurts tourism. A lot of people have said the same thing. The NDP, when I spoke to the jobs minister, she said it isn't. But Loyal seemed to think that it needs to be reworked for Kelowna.
Absolutely. And a news flash, the NDP voted down and voted against 4 amendments that we put forward to exactly do that, to allow a municipality to right size Airbnbs for their own purposes and for what drives their economy, etc. So for Loyal to now say that he doesn't believe that that was the right thing to do, well, he might want to talk to his leader about that, because his leader charged forward and voted down absolutely everything as a block that we put forward to actually right size.
They seem to have taken the hammer approach to it, and then I'm going to segue to Forestry, where they seem to have taken a hammer approach to Forestry as well. More bad news last week. Canfor closed another mill in northern BC, another 500 jobs, and the problem with that, more so, it's 500 good-paying rural jobs that are hard to replace. If you live in Vancouver and you say, oh, you can get retraining, you can do different things, but it's hard in those remote communities like Houston, Fort St. John, Bear Lake, all those Prince George, to find an equivalent type job in that salary they're making, because from that salary they're buying pickup trucks and they're building homes and raising a family. How do you replace those jobs? Like the forestry industry, according to Bruce Rose from AP Planers, is in shambles, and it's unfair. And at the same time, though, Alberta's doing really well.
Absolutely, and Vanderhoof was one of the towns that was really impacted negatively this last week. I couldn't agree with you more. The NDP are dealing not just death of 1,000 cuts. They've done the death of 1,000 cuts to the forestry industry, asking them to wait, asking them to, if only they make and meet these criteria, then they can move forward. And all of a sudden, now they're just dealing death blows to the industry, and largely intended. Like anyone who says, these are just unintended consequences. No, these are intended consequences. It is exactly what their budget has predicted, was that the natural resource sector was going to see a massive slowdown. 2 budgets ago, they predicted a 30% slowdown. This budget, they're predicting another 30% down. We will see more taxes coming in from tobacco than we will from the entire forestry industry, according to the NDP's budget.
That's a healthy alternative.
That is a horrific moneymaker for British Columbians. And you're exactly right. Taxes from tobacco, they don't go to British Columbians. But what does the forestry sector do? It stimulates an entire community. And we're losing that in droves.
It is our number 2 industry right now, probably falling. But it was, and I grew up in the forestry sector myself. I worked in sawmills, and I did that interview with Brenda Bailey. And we talked about how important, she said she has family that worked in there well. And they said they want to do more value added with the logs instead of shipping raw logs to Japan. I said, I would point you that sawmills are value added, because that's actually the finished product that goes into building homes. And for instance, in Merritt, there were 6 mills when NDP took power. Today, there's 0 operating. So that's a testament to what's going on. And the job losses in the sawmill industry, and for companies like Canfor to say that BC-born company too, by the way, one of the bigger BC companies, to say they can't operate in British Columbia because the environment is just not competitive. We have the highest stumpage costs in North America.
Yeah, and we've lost all competitive, not even edge or advantage. We're just no longer competitive on any front from the forestry sector. The other natural resource sector that we've lost out to is the LNG sector. We've watched really over the last 7 years since the NDP have taken over, we've watched as Australia overtook us, as the US overtook us in their exports of LNG. We are literally, I think we're number 11 on the export lineup right now for countries, and we should be an LNG giant. Another one, our mining sector. I went to a mining event, and literally the amount of investment dollars that has absolutely run from our province under the NDP is in the billions, if not trillions of dollars. And again, what does a mine do? Our mining sector is the #1 employer of Indigenous nation members.
Yeah. Mining and logging, for sure.
And logging. Yeah. So you're looking at their economic reconciliation, literally leaving our province. You're looking at towns, at infrastructure, they're the ones who built the roads, etc. Who participate.
Most small communities in British Columbia or in Alberta are built on resource sectors. Totally. You don't go build a town in Fort St. John because it was like, hey, there's a great field here. Yeah. You go and build it because there's LNG there, because there's oil and gas there, or there's a sawmill there.
100%.
You build around the resources, and when the resources leave, there's no economic activity left.
Agreed.
Right? You know what I mean?
Agreed.
And it's not just the mill jobs. It's the guy that invested in that coffee shop, the guy invested in that tire shop, and all those things. And the comments from a lot of people in the forestry sector said it's so bad that it seems like Vancouver, where most of the voters are, see every tree as like it's Stanley Park, and they don't want any cut down, and they don't see that the rest of British Columbia survives off the resource sector.
Yes, and back to your earlier point, I think that there are some really good opportunities for us to utilize more of our lumber and more of our tree in different ways, and to always increase the value add on things. So I don't think that that Brenda Bailey was necessarily offline there. What I would say is there is no strategic plan to do so. There is no holistic plan that the forestry industry can point to and say, okay, that's what we're supposed to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is the fiber that I'm going to have access to. There is nothing that they can point to that will actually allow that to take place.
I read through their plan, their jobs plan, and I said that what's missing there is what screams loud is the sawmill industry is missing from there, right? So it seems to be absent for some reason. But I don't want to stay on forestry too long. I also talked to somebody in the tech sector in Vancouver, and they say right now the tech sector is choosing to go elsewhere because there's one with the federal thing with the capital gains tax, and two with the support and the funding that's available for technology companies. Alberta, again, doing a great job.
Yes.
Like Calgary seems to be a bigger hub right now than Vancouver is, and then people are going either that or they're going to Silicon Valley.
Yes, and I actually, because I served as the shadow minister for the tech and innovation sector, I actually went for a tour in downtown Vancouver and went and visited many of the largest tech sector because we had just lost 15,000 tech jobs in 1 month. And so I went and was interviewing them just to say, like, what do you need? How can we bring back those jobs? And one of the vice presidents looked at me very earnestly and said, well, you could start by figuring out your housing, because we can't compete with some of the neighboring jurisdictions. And he referenced Calgary and he referenced Seattle with their housing prices. He's like, you could also fix your crime. Our crime downtown, we literally have employees that will not actually come to work in our downtown areas because of the things that they see. And he actually told me about some of the incidents that they've experienced, that their employees have experienced, actually like absolutely horrific. And he said all it takes is one or two of these and nobody's feeling safe anymore. So he talked about the amount of money that they're spending on security and the amount of money that they're doling out just to have people with those safe walk homes and etc. And the third thing he said is you can fix your economy. Because unless we have other jobs that their spouses can come to or their partners can come to, we can't actually get those those individuals, even though we have really high paying jobs.
And we did a news story just recently where the standard of living in BC has dropped.
It's horrible.
So,
yeah.
Alberta seems to be taking advantage of us in the ways that we're kind of like in our forestry sector and our tech sector and different things. So they're kind of like where things are. I think Adrian Dix, though, said that they're, he had a really, said that they're crushing Alberta, I think was his quote.
Yeah.
And I could get that wrong. They're crushing Alberta in healthcare.
Yeah.
There was a response from Alberta. What do you say to that?
I would say that, specific to healthcare, you'd have to look at the number of nurses that are on mental leave in Alberta versus BC. You would have to look at the number of nurses or frontline staff in BC that are subjected to violence, that are subjected to drug use, that are subjected to emotional abuse on a daily basis, and compare that to Alberta. And I think you'd find a very stark difference of statistics. When he talks about we're crushing, he's talking about how much they're hiring. And in large part, and a great statistic that just came out was that no minister in recorded British Columbian history has increased the administrative line item of health more than Adrian Dix. So when you talk about who he's adding to the health system, he's adding bureaucrats, he's adding administration, and he's adding layers and level of dilution within the
most British Columbians still have trouble accessing a doctor.
Yeah, you talk to any nurse, they haven't worked a shift where they haven't been at least 30% understaffed. That's become the new norm. I was talking with some ICU nurses who came to see me, and they literally were talking about how they used to have like a 1 to 3, 1 to 5 ratio, and for patient to nurse ratio. And if they walk in and they're not 1 to 10, 1 to 12, they're feeling like they're going to have a good day. But they said it's just absolutely ridiculous, the conditions that they're meant to work under. So are we crushing Alberta? No. The other aspect, I was just talking with a med student, and they were talking about how they went to Alberta and they could literally pop up the patient, and they knew if the patient had been to physio, what all of the different medications that the patient was on, regardless of hospital that they were checking into. Here, we're still on paper charts. We are still literally on paper charts that follow the patient. And I had one of the departments of the hospital come and show me that they had started tracking how much time the physicians, the specialists, take on average every single day of every single shift looking for charts. And on average, it was over 2 hours a day that they are just trying to find the patient's charts that they're attempting to do a consult on.
Your government, BC United or BC Liberals, you guys started a bunch of projects that are just coming. Site C is one of those that are just coming to a close. And there were 3 big capital projects that are just coming to a close. Those are all started by your government. Yeah. What big projects did the NDP put forward in their, I think it's 7 years now they've been in power, right? What can they kind of compare to a Site C?
None. There are none that the NDP have actually initiated. So any of the larger projects like SkyTrain expansions were actually already initiated by our government. And this is one of our biggest criticisms, is that there are no major infrastructure projects that are underway. They've done some really splashy, like, we're going to build this new hospital, we're going to, expand this med school. The irony there is that, KGH still has dark operating rooms. We've got a whole floor that's half empty, that's just used for storage right now that could be opened up for patients. There's expansion potential in all of these different hospitals, but it's not as amazing as doing a, $2 billion project. But to be honest, I'm actually quite relieved that the NDP haven't tried to build more than what they have, because any project that they have built is at minimum 40 to 50 to 150% over budget, and not one of their projects that they've completed was on time. And in fact, when they took over the Site C, they shut it down for an entire year. You probably remember that. John Horgan was going to do everything he could to completely annihilate Site C, but it was past the point of no return. After that calendar year, it was confirmed by the minister that that project was on time and on budget. And now it is more than doubled in its cost. And obviously we know the rest of the story, which is that it's 5 years delayed. I
was actually a guest in Victoria, and I was there when you guys were discussing one big project they tried to put forward. That was the $1 billion plus museum that they wanted to kind of, I think, a John Horgan memorial, I shouldn't say memorial, but his legacy museum.
Yes.
And then that got kiboshed.
Yes, and it's, the amount of taxpayer dollars that is wasted, that is deployed inefficiently, that is absolutely abused, is actually alarming. One of
the key things I remember from that discussion, because I was in there for that discussion, is I can't remember which minister stood up and says we need to build this because we need to store all these artifacts that from our history, and then another MLA stood up and said those are stolen from us. You need to give them back. We don't need that $1 billion museum to house stuff that you need to return to us.
Yes, and that was actually the MLA for Saanich North and the Islands, and that's Adam Olson, who is Indigenous, and so you're right. They, there was no ask for this. It was. I
think that was the talking point that kind of just put everything okay, right? Because it's tough to talk past that, right? Totally. So, let's move to this election now. You've decided prior to all the kerfuffle that's happened that you're not going to seek election. You're going to focus on your company and work and focus on creating more housing demand, or housing for the demand that's out there. Lots of turn of events though. lots with
Yeah.
with Kevin deciding not to run and then folding the BC United Party, and now maybe that wasn't as clean as possible, and it seems to be a bit of a mess, and we still don't know the candidates right now. So, what do you see? Like, how can candidates find a path forward, or what's the
It's still going to be very interesting. You know, I did an interview right after the announcement that BC United was not going to be running a campaign. So we are not. We haven't. There's no folding of the party as
right?
of yet.
Sorry,
It's
they just kind of like
yeah.
they suspended the party. I should be
We're
correct.
suspending the
Suspending it.
campaign on this one, and the party still is there and
Right.
still exists. And we'll probably run a couple of candidates just to make sure that all of Elections BC criteria are met to remain a party. Right. But having said that, there is this desperation to get the NDP out, and I think that when you see that level of desperation, when you see that level of willingness to do whatever it takes, that signals that change is necessary, that we have to take a different course. But having said that, this is not a fait accompli. You know, John Rustad with the BC Conservative Party really is going to have to show the voter that he's willing to come to the center. And he has this amazing opportunity with all the candidates. He has an amazing opportunity with the Okanagan with candidates. And yet he is barely
he seemed to have made some moves, though. He seemed like with Eleanor Sturko, with like he's made some moves, but then there's some that you kind of question as to why it wasn't more of a united party. You know what I mean? Like more of unification of the two coming together, and more. And plus, I think it's been a while now. It's been almost 2 weeks, right? Yeah. Since Kevin made that announcement, and we don't have a clear path as to who's who in the election.
No, and I think that's going to bode. I think it's going to really be a challenge for voters, because for any party who's trying to win, like the BC Conservatives, really they're going to have voter apathy. I don't know who to vote for. I don't see myself in any of those candidates, and that's always what any candidate is trying to do, is really mirror back for for that voter who they see that voter to be, and that is not what they are doing right now. And so there are a lot of orphaned voters, and those orphaned voters, I mean, we only got 60% of the vote out the last election. I could see that number dropping simply because people don't know who to vote for.
How much of this, the suspension of the BC United Party, has to do with maybe a misstep in rebranding, at the same time John Rustad getting very lucky with Pierre's party and having a very similar logo and utilizing very similar messaging, because I mean Pierre Poilievre seems to have rock star status, filling like arenas and that with people. Yeah. And then John's kind of adopted a lot of the even the slogans, common sense and different things, and then the C is very much the same. So how much do you think that played into kind of like Kevin Falcon stepping back?
Massive. It's a massive amount. I think other parts of it is that we're losing more and more of our media. The attack on media from the federal government with some of their new bills, I think, has really impacted things, and it's if you're not one entity, and I don't want to name them here, but it's very difficult right now, and it's difficult for people to get information and to see things. So even with the rebrand, how people would say, well, I don't see you anywhere. It's like, where are you looking? Like, where are you going for your media, for your announcements, for your, like, who is covering the stories that you care about, and how do we get that and propagate that? And is it luck? Absolutely. I could, the BC Conservative Party having the, changing their logo to look almost identical to the federal, and having Pierre Poilievre on really a massive wave right now, I think is definitely boded very well for John Rustad.
Is that also, though, like, going to play into this? Because there is such, across Canada, the polls show it, that there is a distaste right now for the Liberal Party and for the NDP party, right? And I think that's why Jagmeet Singh pulled his support for Justin Trudeau. Do you think a lot of that will play into the election day when people are looking at that NDP name? Because they are affiliated. The NDP in BC and the NDP federals are affiliated, whereas the Conservatives and the Conservative Party of Canada are not affiliated.
I think that, strangely, provincial and federal don't always emulate each other as well as what you think that they would. Take, for instance, the NDP were already plummeting in the polls federally, and yet we see an NDP candidate win for premier in Manitoba.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there is not the same connection for people federally and provincially, and I think that that's a lucky thing right now for David Eby, especially considering David Eby is farther left than what the federal NDP are. He is far more on that activist realm of that far left than what we've seen before in political history, really, in BC.
So you have some responsibilities left. You serve until the election. What's the path forward for Renee? Are you going to be stumping for somebody? Are you gonna kind of like sit back and see what happens, or what's your game plan?
To be honest, I haven't made a final decision. It's no secret that we our candidates right now in the riding that I currently am honored and blessed to sit in as the MLA is very tumultuous. We've seen some real very strange, I would say, choices by the parties that are there. So it's for me, it's anyone's game, and I haven't decided. I haven't decided whether or not I use my voice to really help one of them, or if I just sit this one out.
Well, obviously you have a voice. If you could pick up the phone and speak to John today, is there a message that you would relay to him, or have you already relayed that message?
No, I would say, he has more work to do on getting a big tent, on opening it up, and making sure that the centrist right of center has a place and a home. And right now, that's not happening. But he's also really riding the Pierre Poilievre wave and not introducing policy and not, coming out with anything at all that anyone can really figure out and hook their wagon to.
You talked about media. We were one of the few media outlets that continued to interview John Rustad and Kevin Falcon. We got a lot of good access to both of them, and we did a lot of interviews where they didn't seem to get a lot of airtime anywhere else. But we can't get access. We've asked David Eby many times to come on and have an interview. So far, he has declined. Adrian Dix has declined. We have had the Forestry Minister, the Jobs Minister, and we've had another candidate, or not candidate, an MLA that we spoke to. But it's hard to get access to the NDP.
Well, I mean, Eby also said that he wasn't going to go to certain debates. I mean, Eby doesn't want to be put on a pin. He doesn't want to actually have to defend his record. He doesn't want to bring forward new policy. He wants to basically run attack ads on the BC Conservatives and hope that people vote for him. So I would say that it's not surprising that he doesn't want to come out.
Our job as media is to hold power accountable. But if we've seen it at the federal level and now provincially, where power doesn't want to be held accountable, unless I've heard from, I did an interview with Holly Doan from Blacklocks. They're facing their own challenges with the federal government. Is that she said that the notices are only going out to 2 specific news outlets. They're not even sharing with the other outlets. So it seems like they're cutting access to even, past CBC and Canadian Press, that even some of the other outlets aren't even getting access.
And I think it's something that the electorate, that the voters need to start holding their governments accountable for. Yeah. If you don't come out, if you don't talk to my community, if you don't have those interviews, if you don't defend your policies or your record, you know what? I'm not going to vote for you. I can't vote for you this time. Anything
else you'd like to share? Or if you're very generous with your time, that's great.
No, I appreciate you very much, and I appreciate that you are trying to open up the conversation to all the different candidates, to all the different leaders, and really allow the electorate to make their choices.
I think these KelownaNow is one of the few that are doing longer form interviews, and I think it really allows the candidate or the MLA to talk more and get the public to get to know who they are, as opposed to getting clipped, right? Because I've talked to some politicians, and they're sometimes scared to do an interview with like some of the national outlets because they know they're getting a 30-second hit, right? They're going to get clipped. and some of it's going to be taken out of context, and we're seeing some of those examples, especially across the border, where we're seeing stuff that's completely twisted into what was actually said, right? So I mean, we're a big proponent of doing long form interviews, and I think that's a good way to do it. And again, Mr. Eby, if you're willing to have an interview with us, we would love it.
Yeah, I'll make sure I reach out and let them know.
Anyway, I thank you, Renee, for joining us, and
thank you, Tim.
and I thank you for watching Kelowna Now.